Hey guys, welcome back to Rad JBI. I'm JB. This is part 2 of our video series on this 2026 Yamaha YZ450F suspension testing and development. This first video was the intro on why we bought 2 brand new 2026 Yamaha YZ450s. We've already broke in the one stock bike that we're going to use for benchmarking and comparison, and this is the bike that we're going to build up to the JBI spec for suspension. Now in this video, we're going to pull off the front forks, and we're going to share with you the changes and evolution of these forks over the years from the previous stock configurations they have come in. Then we're also going to share with you the modifications, adjustments, and upgrades we're going to do to these forks to improve the overall setting. In the past, we would utilize our JBI R&D KYB forks that I have right here. As you can see, they are well used and abused. They've been mounted to numerous different bikes. We've collected feedback from numerous different riders, and that's really allowed us to improve our setting year over year. But now, instead of buying extra sets of forks and shocks, we decided, why not buy just complete extra bikes? That way we can really fine tune and improve the suspension that we offer. So stay tuned. This is the video you don't want to miss. All right, you guys, thanks for tagging along so far. So as we see, we have the KYB compression assembly removed from the fork. One area I want to point out right now is this pressure spring right here. This was introduced in 2025 by KYB. This spring is longer than the previous years, and what it does is it puts preload on the free piston. That is this white plastic piece right here. The way we can tell is that it does not have any free movement. If I try to pull back on it, I'd have to apply a lot of force to get that spring to actually compress. So there's no, let's say, free play or slop inside of it. From 2024 all the way back to essentially 2006, KYB was not preloading these pressure springs, meaning this plastic piston had a little bit of play this way and that way when it was installed. Now, that does not mean that when we install this into here, that this free piston is moving around freely. No, when you install it back into the cartridge and there's oil inside of it, the oil is going to take up the extra volume, and it's always going to put positive pressure on this free piston, so it won't actually be loose. So for 2025, they went to a longer spring, this right here, and it starts preloading this. So what that means is the amount of effort or force it takes to get this piston to start compressing down is much higher than previous years, even though they reduce the spring rate of the pressure spring. To the right of it, I have our JBI KYB pressure spring. This is the original 107 millimeter length. So this is the length that used to come in the KYB forks, and it will not preload this free piston. However, this spring rate is actually 22 newtons instead of 18 newtons. So it is a higher spring rate. However, since it's not preloaded, the initial force to make this piston move is not as high. And we'll actually go out and we'll pencil some numbers to help you guys have a better intuitive sense of what exactly is going on here. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to start disassembling this so we can remove this free piston assembly and swap out the pressure spring for our JBI pressure spring. Before we do that, let's measure the distance of this free piston assembly as it's assembled. So we'll take our measuring tape. We're going to go from the bottom of our free piston to the top of the fork cap, and we see we have approximately 146 millimeters. All right, guys, so I have the original pressure spring removed here. Let's take a measurement on the length so we can show you the length of it. It is 112 millimeters. Give or take a half mil either way. There's always going to be some variance when it comes to making springs. So that is roughly 5 millimeters longer than our pressure spring, which again is the same length as the previous year's, which is 107 millimeters. So let's rig this back up real quick so you can kind of see the difference. We're still going to be doing some work on this, but in the meantime, I'm a visual learner, and this will help you guys kind of follow along on what we're doing and why. So we're going to do this hand tight, but it's still threaded all the way down. All right, so as you can see, there's a little bit of play now in this. Now keep in mind, once this is assembled back into the fork, oil is going to take up the extra volume in the cartridge, and it's going to push this piston up in place. So it won't actually be moving back and forth. It won't be loose or have free play inside of there. So let's take a measurement again to see where this comes out at. I'm going to slide this all the way down. Or by down, I mean touching the spring. And we are at 145 about. So there's a millimeter less. So let's do some math. All right, guys, so out here we made a really simple Excel spreadsheet so we can give you guys a good visual on exactly what's taking place with the different pressure springs. So let's just re-summarize what we just showed you. The KYB pressure spring is now 112 millimeters long. The JBI pressure spring, which we are installing and we provide with our DIY kits, is 107 millimeters long. Remember, this is the length they've been using since 2024, all the way back to about 2006. The difference in length of these springs is 5 millimeters. The spring rates are different also. The new spring rate is 18 newtons. The JBI pressure spring is 22 newtons. Again, just like what KYB was previously using. The difference of the free piston on where it starts is 1 millimeter. Earlier we showed you the difference from the bottom of the free piston to the top of the fork cap was 146. And when you use a pressure spring that is shorter, it is 145. So what that means is the amount of spring preload we have with the KYB pressure spring is 4 millimeters. Whereas when using the JBI pressure spring, there is 0 millimeters of preload. Now the free piston travel, or the distance the spring is going to be compressed while riding, so meaning when you go to full bottom out on the forks, is approximately 45 millimeters. So what that means is the initial spring force that we have at 0 millimeters, meaning the free piston is at its 146 length right now, it has not moved, is 72 newtons. In order to get that free piston to move 1 millimeter, we need to apply another 18 newtons of spring force, and that'll give us a total of 90 newtons. Whereas when you use our JBI pressure spring, the initial pressure on the spring is 0. It is just at equilibrium. In order to make it move 1 millimeter, we need to apply 22 newtons of spring force, and we get 22 newtons. So as you can see immediately, with the 2026 model and also the 2025 model, the forks have a lot more initial resistance in order to get them removed because of the added spring force on the free piston. So if you feel like from previous years, meaning 2024 and previous, that these 2025 and 26 models are a little bit more chattery and harsh on small and medium bumps, this is one of the reasons why. So we prefer a stiffer spring rate with no preload on it. Again, once it's assembled in the cartridge, there won't be any free play on it. As you can see, this has a lot more spring force initially, and through about the first, 18 millimeters of travel, and then they become equal. After that, that's when the difference starts to add up. You can see at 19 millimeters of spring travel, we're at 414 newtons, whereas the JBI pressure spring would be at 418. And then the difference starts to add up and compound from there. We did this all the way to about 27 millimeters, so that's gonna be about just a little more than half of the free piston spring travel to show you where it ends up at, and it continues to compound from there. I share this with you because what we have found is that the 2025 model and this 2026 model, the forks tend to be chattery and not as plush as we'd like them to be on the small and medium bumps. But once you hit a big impact, like land hard from a jump, the forks compress through their travel pretty easily, even though they're pretty stiff initially. And that's because the spring force of the pressure spring does not build up as we get deeper into the travel. That's why we can use a pressure spring with a higher spring rate, but no initial preload on it. So that way we get a fork that is plusher and more supple over those small and medium bumps, but also has better bottoming resistance as the fork goes deeper into the travel. Now, this is accounting for we keep all things the same. I mean, if you just took the stock fork as it sits right now and only changed out to pressure spring, which we do sell individually on our website, you would get this exact improvement out of the fork. Smoother on the small and medium bumps and better bottoming resistance on the high impacts. So that's enough math today for me. Let's cut back to the shop and do some more work on these JBI spec KYB forks. All right, guys, we have our beautiful JBI KYB Motocross spec pressure spring installed. We do offer these in two spring rates. This is the 22 Newton, which we primarily use for motocross. We also have a softer spring rate, which is 20 Newtons, which we use for soft motocross and our off-road applications. One quick visual thing you can see is it does have a gold plating on it. The reason we did that was originally we were just buying pressure springs from KYB. That started to get expensive due to the volume we were buying. Also, they would sell out, so we didn't have access to these for a while. So I decided, hey, let's make our own pressure springs. And commonly in the past, I would find that these ones would sometimes get rust on them due to it being just a raw spring with no coating on it. And because these springs don't interfere with anything, meaning nothing rubs against them, I said, hey, let's put a rust prevention coating on it. So that way, one, the spring looks awesome, but two, more importantly, it won't rust. Also, it only costed us like another $1 per spring to do that. So we figured, why not go the extra mile and take a good item and make it even better in terms of its durability and service life. So we got this installed. Now it's time to remove this valving and install our JBI titanium subvalve, along with our JBI spec valving, motocross valving that we've already built. We did this for two reasons. When it comes to modifying the compression assembly on the fork, to safely do that, you need to remove the peening on the silver post here so we can safely remove the nut. When you do that, you're not often left with many threads left over. So when it comes to reassemble this, you still have some threads, but not many. And also, since this is aluminum, you're limited to how much you can torque these down. We were commonly buying a lot of these from KYB as well. And again, the cost of that was pretty high. So we decided, let's remake this item. And again, we decided, let's spend an extra $1 instead of making out of aluminum and make them out of titanium. Reason for that is now we have all the threads we would want when it comes to reassembly. Also, with it being titanium, we can now reassemble this to a higher torque spec during our reassembly process. These are a key feature in our JBI DIY kits. So if you don't want to send your suspension into us at Ride JBI, we provide you a DIY kit already custom built with these pieces in there. So it makes the install of this very straightforward and intuitive for you. So now I've talked about that, let's cut back to some B-roll and get this installed. All right, guys, so previously when we worked on these, we would grind the tip off of that. We get a bunch of just metal dust and contaminants everywhere, which you can wash away and clean. But now since we have our JBI titanium assemblies. Instead, we just clamp these in a vise. We're not too worried about the integrity of this free piston anymore. And we are just going to rip off this nut right here because we want to reuse our KYB compression piston, which is well designed from the factory. We rarely see the need to change that or alter the design of it. It is very often that this piston design itself is the limiting factor in the performance of the fork. So that's why you see us at Ride JBI commonly just reuse the pistons that are already in there. That holds true for all the Showa suspension as well. Anything from like pretty much 2006 and newer for those brands tends to have some really good internal piston designs already. So you don't really see the need for that. Now this can be a little tough to get off. So what I like to do is take some Nypax and just kind of smashes the edges in. Again, we're not reusing this. We're not really worried about the integrity of it. Cool, and that's all I want from this. We're going to sort through these shims later, throw them inside of a shim city. That's our big shim cabinet that we got. Now we're ready to get our base valve piston, or base valve compression piston, remounted back up so we can complete our new JBI spec KYB compression assembly. We already went ahead and built our JBI spec motocross valving spec for this. It's already been cleaned, blown out with compressed air, so we don't have any dirt, debris, dust, or anything inside of it. I'm going to go ahead and use some compressed air just to blow off this piston, just to ensure there's no contaminants inside of it. Slide this down. Love these TI posts. Again, we can mount these M6 pistons to a much higher torque value. We also do it with some Loctite, so we can really ensure that this assembly is never going to come apart during normal operation. And then in the future, if we ever need to do some valving modifications to it, or somebody in the future that buys this bike from us, they want to do some valving mods to it, they got a really beautiful, clean post to work with all the threads, and just something that looks awesome. So let's just take a minute to admire the beauty and also the effort that's gone into developing these JBI spec components and settings for this KYB suspension. All right, guys, let's summarize what we did, why we did it, and what we should expect from this JBI spec forks for the current mods. So we talked about the free piston earlier. The main reason we did that was we wanted to improve the fork's comfort and plushness over the small and medium bumps. So that's when the wheel first strikes the bump and the forks begin to compress. This type of obstacle you commonly find going into corners and coming out of corners. So we're going to find that with these modifications we did, which is our pressure spring and our JBI valving modifications, meaning the JBI valving spec that we've developed over time. Compared to stock, we're going to have a fork that has a smoother, more comfortable feel with the small and medium bumps. And also because the pressure spring ramps up with more pressure, we're going to have a little bit more bottom resistance at the end of the stroke. But however, the key features of this really is initial travel feel. So again, initial plushness and comfort. And now we're going to go over some other modifications we do to ensure the fork has good hold up and it has good bottom resistance as well. Cool. So now we're pulling out the mid-valve assembly. Another key update that KYB did a while ago is it went to the Delta shims on the rebound post. That has to help have the oil flow more freely through the mid-valve so it's less obstructed. This is something they took out of the WP playbook. They use these type of shims inside of the WP cone valve forks. I'm personally not too big of a fan of them. Reason being, if these shims ever rotate, they will no longer be covering the rebound ports, and you're going to lose pretty much all your compression and rebound damping. This piston, however, has not changed. This is pretty much the same piston from 2025 all the way back to about 2018. 1 year, it did not feature a bleed hole. I think that was 2023. What I'm getting at is we're actually, when we modify this, we're going to go back to round shims. Reason being is I much prefer the durability and the safetiness of knowing that if the shims for some reason do rotate, the rebound port is always going to be properly covered. So we're not against it, but I don't feel that the added benefit of the Delta shims is something that much worthwhile We've tested it both ways. By that I mean we've tried delta shims with our JBI settings on everything else, and we've also tried them without, and none of us could tell any difference in terms of the damping and how positive or negatively the fork felt after that. So since because it was such a subtle difference, something that we couldn't even tell, we figured let's err on the side of durability and safetiness, so that way we know that if they ever do rotate, it's still properly covered. So let's start taking this apart and get this shimming off so we can put in our JBI spec valving. So let's get this rebound piston apart so we can install our new JBI titanium rebound post along with its JBI spec motocross valving. This is another item on the fork that in order to safely remove this nut, if we're going to reuse this rebound post, once you grind off the pins on the rebound post to safely remove this nut, you maybe have 2.5 threads at the most in order to engage the nut width on reassembly. And that's something we feel that is just not that safe. So in the past, again, we were buying a lot of these from KYB themselves. That started to get expensive. Sometimes they'd sell out and we couldn't get it anymore. So we decided let's redesign this piece, maybe spend an extra $1 in material costs, get it made out of titanium. So that way there's never a possibility of it rusting. Also, we have all the threads we need so we get full thread engagement with our nut, and we can place the same torque value as we do on this. Meaning this is a steel post, so we can torque it to a higher value than we could the compression aluminum post. This being titanium, we can still do the same torque value on it. Again, however, we have all the threads we want to utilize. So when it comes to taking this apart, we at Ride JBI no longer have to grind off the tip and get a bunch of metal dust or flakes anywhere. If you buy our DIY kit as well, you won't have to do the same thing either. You can just mount this up in your vise, which like I'm going to show you now, and we're just going to rip this nut off right there and not care about the integrity of this part because we're not going to reuse it. So if you guys are watching this and you want to know exactly how to install the DIY kit, we actually have about an hour-long video which takes you step by step on exactly how to install the JBI spec KYB fork DIY kit. It's much more in-depth and technical than this video. This video is just kind of a good overview, again, of what we're doing, why we're doing it, what to expect from our JBI spec mods on this 2026 Yamaha YZ450. And I think it'll really allow you guys to better appreciate all the effort that goes on behind the scenes here at Ride JBI on what we do, and also just the transparency that we offer. We definitely are the most transparent suspension company out there in terms of what we're doing. And we take a lot of pride in that because we're very confident in what we're doing and what we develop, and we want to share that with you guys. All right, guys, so as you can see, if you were to grind off the tip of this so that way you could safely remove the nut, you're only going to have a couple threads afterwards to reuse when you reassemble this, and you're going to be really limited on your torque value to do that because of the few remaining threads there. So with our JBI titanium rebound posts, which are also included with our JBI DIY kits, they come complete, already valved to a custom spec for you. You can see we have one more thread compared to what's on stock. So we got one more thread for engagement so that we can really get good thread engagement when we tighten this back down. Now I've removed this, we're not reusing it again. That's why I just ripped off the nuts, and it kept everything else really clean because we don't have a bunch of grinding dust or anything on our piston. I'm going to go ahead and just clean this off with a little bit of compressed air just to verify. And then we're going to let this cool down a little bit before we apply some Loctite to it, and then before we apply our JBI titanium rebound post that is already complete with our JBI spec mid-valve compression valving. Now we're retaining the feature, what's called the leaf spring feature. That is this feature on the post. We've replicated that over here. We're big fans of the leaf spring style mid-valve. It's something we put in all of our fork builds, whether it's KYB such as this. We put it in Showa forks which do not come with it. We also put it in a lot of the WP forks as well. We're big fans of these because when you set them upright, they ensure that the fork always has good hold up when you ride fast and aggressively. So that's something we really enjoy because you can't really replicate that with other styles of mid-valves, such as the traditional style mid-valve had a coil spring instead, and the shims would lift away vertically from the piston. We installed our JBI titanium rebound post, complete with the JBI titanium leaf spring cup, and then JBI spec valving on the compression and rebound side. As we noted earlier, this style of mid-valve, the leaf spring mid-valve, which the bike already had, always provides the forks with good hold-up. Now, it is a tricky component to assemble or to configure, because if you assemble it in a way that's too stiff, the forks are always ride too high. It'll affect cornering, and it'll make the forks even extra choppier and chattery on small and medium bumps. So you got to find a spec that's just right, so you always have just enough initial hold-up so the forks ride up in their travel, and you get good hold up when you ride fast and aggressively. This will complement well to what we did to the base valve compression mods earlier. Now we're going to shift focus to two other modifications we're going to do to further improve the fork's hold up, and then another modification we're going to do to further improve the fork's bottoming resistance. Alright guys, I just installed our JBI fork volume spacer. Let's talk about oil volumes for a moment and how those have been modified by KYB/Yamaha over the years. Now this is I call it Gen 3 KYB fork. It is when they increased the size of the mid valve on this from 24 millimeters to 25 millimeters. So that means the cartridge diameter here was increased from 28 to 29 millimeters. Now in previous years, KYB in their manual, when I say KYB, I also mean Yamaha. In their manual, they would say the oil volume for this fork in the outer chamber was around 290 to about 390 cc's approximately. This would vary a little bit depending on the model. Now, they did update this in their manual since 2025. Now it says the minimum oil amount is 260 and the maximum oil amount is 360. I can't see why they would have modified the upper limit to that because nothing internally changed the overall capacity that you can put in the outer chamber of the fork. So in my experience and in my opinion, we can totally go to the lower limit of 260. There's nothing that is being hurt, but I can't see why we would limit ourselves at 360 cc's of oil. You could definitely go up beyond that. Now at Ride JBI, we typically don't go beyond 320 cc's of oil because of what that does when the spring perch, which is not mounted right now, engages the oil. We have a really cool video, which we'll put up a little link below, which shows you how the fork reacts when you add oil to the fork. We built up this clear fork tube and we add oil to it at different increments. So you can see what happens of the engagement of what's called the oil lock collar and the spring perch, depending on the oil level in the forks. So in stock form, this bike comes with 290 cc's of oil. That is, in my opinion, on the low side. So we're going to install our JBI volume spacer, and that way this is going to take 40 cc's of volume up without us having to add oil to the fork. However, when we do finish installing this, we are going to add a little bit more oil than the 290 because I still believe that's still lower than it needs to be. We can still add some oil back to make the spring perch engage a little bit earlier without hurting the overall feel of the fork. An easy tip for you is if you have these forks and you don't want to really make too many modifications to them, buy our pressure spring from us, just install that, and then increase your oil volume to 320 cc's, and then pair it with this as well. You'll get a smoother fork over small and medium bumps, and you'll get some better bottom resistance as well because of the volume spacer, the pressure spring, and the added oil. So the main reason for our volume spacer is so that we can alter the progressiveness of the fork as it compresses. Because when a fork compresses, inside of the fork, we have oil at the bottom of it, we have a spring, the main coil spring, and then we have a chamber of air above that. So when the fork compresses and decreases its volume, we're actually compressing the air inside the fork. And depending upon how much oil is in that fork will dictate how much air is also in that fork. And when you manipulate that volume of air, that'll dictate how quickly the air builds up pressure as the fork decreases its volume. So we have found at Ride JBI, we prefer not to go above 325 cc's of oil so we can have a certain engagement point of the spring perch, but we still want to alter the progressiveness of the fork. So our volume spacer was a way to do that. Now this was inspired by what comes in mountain bike shocks. There's certain mountain bike shocks out there that are air shocks, and they provide you with different plastic disc that you can install into the shock to alter the overall air volume in the shock. So that way you can again alter its progressiveness. At Ride JBI, I'm always looking around the industry, whether it's motocross, street bikes, or even the mountain bike industry, to see what type of suspension technology is out there, and if we can ever be inspired by that and apply it to the suspension we have so we can take full advantage of it. So let's just re-summarize what we did. We installed our JBI volume spacer. That's going to take up some more volume inside the fork, and it's going to have the fork have better hold up and slightly better bottom resistance as well. So far we've done mods to improve the initial plushness of the fork and better comfort of it. And we've done mods to improve the holdup of the fork as well. So compared to stock, we're making improvements everywhere with no compromises or no steps backwards. So we still got one more modification we need to install to this, and then we'll be ready to let this sit for a while, bleed it up, and mount it back up to the bike. So I just installed our JBI Titanium Pro Perch. As you can see, oil is going to flow through the inside, and it's going to come through these reed valves, similar to what you'd find on a two-stroke. And these are actually going to flex open. Now, compared to this design, you can see ours is much more restrictive. So when it does engage the oil, it's going to slow down the fork much more effectively than the OEM plastic spring seat design here. Now, even though it is more restrictive, a big takeaway is that ours has a unique feature that nobody else has, in the sense that our spring perch can actually flex open. So that way it's never too restrictive. If these ports, or let's say reed pedals, do not have the ability to actually flex open, it could definitely make the fork too stiff when it engages the oil and cause it to hydraulically lock, which is not a good sensation or feel for the rider. So this item right here, the only time it provides additional compression resistance, aka bottoming resistance, is when this spring perch engages the oil near the end of travel. And we can alter that engagement point by altering the amount of oil inside of the fork's outer chamber. Again, check out that video in the link below that I talked about, where I showed you what happens as you add oil to the fork. It'll give you some really good intuitive and visual insight to what is happening. So this item right here, the only effect it's going to have on the fork is helping the fork slow down the last few inches of fork travel and give you better bottoming resistance. By that I mean it's going to be harder for the forks to bottom out, but also when they do bottom out, it's going to be more of a hydraulic feel than a metal to metal feel. So as you can see, we've really attacked and modified this fork at all these different angles to ensure that we get the comfort and plushness that we want, we get the holdup that we want, and we get the bottom resistance that we want. So at Ride JBI, when we modify a fork, we like to modify the valving, the outer chamber volume, and the spring perch. So that way we can attack each of these three categories with very little overlap and ensure that when we do that, it really reduces any compromise in the fork setting. Instead, it just improves the fork across the board. I'm really excited to get this finished up, get some oil in it, and bleed it. We're going to let this sit for a bit so the Loctite can cure. And then we're going to fill this fork up with oil, bleed it, and get it assembled and mount it back up to the bike. So we are all wrapped up with our JBI spec revalve on these KYB front forks. I'm really excited to continue our testing on these. I'm already really proud with the settings that we have developed so far, and it's going to take a lot of effort to improve what's already great. The reason I share that is these bikes already come with good suspension settings. To improve upon that, it's pretty tough, and we did a great job on that. So now to improve upon something that's great, to make it even better, well, we're going to have a work cut out for us. But at Ride JBI, we're all about putting in effort and hard work. So thanks for staying tuned for this video. Stay tuned for the next video where we remove the shock on this bike and we revalve it to a matching JBI spec shock setting.